But look, we're very, very fortunate to have two leaders from two of the most important democracies in the world at the moment. And while, if you look at the map of the Arctic, you may say our friends in India and our friends in Japan aren't exactly in the Arctic, both countries since 2013 have been official observers at the Arctic Council. Both have a vision for global geopolitics, the moment we're in, and they know the importance of the Arctic as part of this. So we're very, very fortunate this year at Arctic 360 to have some leaders from the Indo-Pacific to talk about their country's agenda and to talk about the Arctic so that we can gain a perspective that I think adds and complements what we heard from some of our EU ambassadors, our European allies yesterday. So I'm going to give both of our guests the chance to talk about how their country has a vision for the Arctic and what is their personal priority as their country's representative in Canada. So I'd like to start with my friend, the ambassador from Japan.
Okay, thank you, Erin-san. I'm so happy to be here. This is my third time to participate in this Arctic 360s. I'm so honored. Then you asked the sort of general view of Japan. So this is based upon my own experience visiting the three territories and also reading books and policy papers. I would say when we talk about Arctic affairs, I have five different elements, which are all interrelated. The first, security affairs, geopolitics. Because even before the global warming starts, all those ICBM from Moscow to Washington was on the top of the Arctic. So this is a very, very serious theater and area for the defense and security. And that is one element. Second element is, of course, the environment. Because the speed of the melting ice beams unprecedented. It's already more than the half of the size. So this environmental impact is so serious. And that environmental impacts have enormous connotations in various ways. Then third point is business. Because now people are talking about the Northwest Passage, Northeast Passage. And if we do, so using those Arctic route, it's much shorter and less expensive to bring things from European side to Asian side. So that has an enormous impact. And also, now we are talking about critical minerals, rare earth, all those resources. Say, before the global warming, it was frozen beneath the land. But now, there's a possibility we can exploit those natural resources in the Arctic areas. So that has an enormous impact on businesses. And the fourth, and at the same time in Arctic, there's an enormous international cooperation going on, especially on the scientific side. So I have a chance to visit the CHART, Canadian High Altitude Research Station. And there are so many, including Japanese scholars, from many countries, they come and to do research, to identify the reasons and the mechanism of the global warming through the Arctic research. And that is a very good thing of goodwill of human beings. And fifth, this is very important. And in the Arctic area, there's so many indigenous communities. And I visited 10 days for those areas, and I met various leaders and the community people. And this is a very important issue when we talk about Arctic, for the living standard and also the electricity and others. So I repeat, when we talk about the Arctic affairs, security, environment, business, international cooperation, especially on science, and the indigenous community. Then I'll talk each of them later. Perfect. Thank you very much, Erin-san.
Thank you. That almost sounds like Arctic 360's mandate, those five things, and we've had great conversations on that. And you talked about Japanese researchers at CHARS. Well, Yvonne, right there, opened the CHARS Center as parliamentary secretary. And of course, Prime Minister Harper, it was one of his signature investments in the Arctic, which came up in his anniversary celebrations just last week. Yes, so, High Commissioner, India's vision for the Arctic, and obviously, and I told you I was going to say this as a friend, I gave you a heads up, it's a bit of a different dynamic because our friend, our Commonwealth ally in India, so many ties, but you're also in the BRICS alliance, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and there may be a different approach to the Arctic there. Talk about that if you wish, and India's vision for how the Arctic plays a role in current geopolitics.
No, thank you, Erin. I've just been 3 months, 4 months here, and I've never dealt with the Arctic before. But I think 3 months bearing Ottawa's minus temperatures, I think I'm now equipped to handle the Arctic. No, India has been doing polar research for a long time. It's been almost 40, 50 years that we were in the Antarctic. The Antarctic is, of course, a different ballgame. That's one continent surrounded by ocean. Here it's an ocean surrounded by continents. And there are no sovereignty issues there, huge sovereignty issues here. So for us, Arctic has been only from 2008 that we came in with our station at Svalbard in Norway. But to see where India is interested in the Arctic, we've been interested for a long time. And for all the reasons that my colleague, the ambassador of Japan, said. But more than that, what is most important is it affects us very deeply within India. We look at the world as 3 poles, the North Pole, South Pole, and the Himalayan pole, because these 3 hold the maximum amount of frozen fresh water in the world. And we have found over the years that Arctic amplification, which is the heating up of the Arctic, which is much more than the heating up of the world, has a lot of influence on our monsoons. And the monsoons are India's lifeblood. We cannot survive without the monsoons. Any vagaries. I mean, we've heard of the El Nino effect, the La Nina effect, but the Arctic amplification has a direct connect with what happens to the monsoons. And so we've been studying it for a long time. We've been studying the teleconnections between the Arctic and the monsoon weather patterns in India. And for us, so it is most important. We have also scientists in charge. We have a station in Svalbard. We've been doing a lot of Arctic research. Antarctica, I won't get into that because that's, even though it's the same capabilities, this is a different cup of tea. More than just the monsoons, we have been studying glaciers for a long time. In the Himalaya, we study about 15,000 glaciers on an average day. But more than glaciers, we've suddenly realized in the last 15, 20 years that the permafrost in the Himalayas actually is very similar to the permafrost in the Arctic. Whereas you have a flat permafrost, we have a vertical permafrost. And not just that, a large amount of our states, you see, we are the largest population in the world, 1.4 billion people, and growing. And we need all the land we can. We are the largest population in the world, but the 7th largest in terms of size, so which means there's a stress on land. So large amount of our states, including the state of Ladakh, for example, 80% of it is on permafrost. And we never realized that. And so for us, there's a lot of things to do for hazard detection, for hazard warning, for climate changes, and also for implementation of building codes. How do you construct on permafrost? Because we have found in the last 15 to 20 years that the melting of the permafrost actually is resulting in breakages, glacial lake outburst floods, which we had in 2023, which is one of the biggest outbursts that we ever had. And so for us, studying the permafrost, seeing how to do it, using AI. So basically, we take the flat permafrost that you get in the Arctic, we take the vertical permafrost, we put it together to do modelings, universal modeling, which allows us to look at how increasing temperatures affect frozen lands, because that's what's going to happen. And when frozen lands happen, how do populations get affected? How do you do building designs? How do you build over permafrost? Do you do an insulation layer? Do you do stilts? You know, there are many, many issues on which we talk about. So these are critical areas for why we are interested in the Arctic. More than that also, like my colleague, the ambassador of Japan said, for us also the northern sea route is very important for us to get across. It reduces time of shipping between India and Europe by 40% if you go through the Malacca Straits or you go through the Suez Canal. And that's a huge saving for us. So we are very interested in the northern sea route. In fact, we have a working group with Russia working on how do we navigate to the northern sea route. From Canada, for example, flights that go to India, Only Air India can fly to India because we can go over Russia.
Yeah.
Air Canada, unfortunately, has to take the longer route. And so the Northern Sea route for us is important. That we can talk about minerals, we can talk about defense, everything else, but that is one. And then coming back to what Erin, you said about BRICS, we are member of every possible grouping in the world. We are one of the few who are in every grouping, whether it's the G20, it's the Quad, it's BRICS, it's anything else, SCO. We have something called multi-alignment. We align with every country, what now Prime Minister Carney calls variable geometry. Mm-hmm. You align with every other country. What the West has suddenly realized now, we did it 50 years ago. That is, you align with every country on issues. There are no permanent enemies, no permanent friends. Every country you have to work with. If you are a big country, you cannot have a system where you say, we don't work with this. And so if we have to handle the Arctic, we need friends on the Russian side, you need friends on the Canadian side, on the Japanese side, everywhere else. And we are the ones who want to make sure that the Arctic remains a zone of peace and not a theater for maritime conflict. And so that's where India stands.
You can play honest broker then, High Commissioner. No, that's fascinating. A bit of the butterfly effect, thinking about the impact of our Arctic on monsoons in India. What a great way to look at things. I'm now going to switch, and I have to take advantage of this because, you know, the 2026 is still a fairly new year. And in Canada, we think the biggest political earthquake there was globally on politics was our Prime Minister's speech in Davos, which was a very good speech. But the biggest earthquake was actually the election recently in Japan. Prime Minister Takeuchi won the biggest majority in modern Japan's history, and she has a real vision for defense. In fact, she's got the same plan as Mark Carney to make 2% of GDP on defense by the end of March. So talk a little bit about her election, Ambassador, and her look at defense as a priority for her government.
So probably you might be nicely surprised by the biggest victory by the LDP, which is the ruling party of Japan many years, but the two-thirds supermajority. So Prime Minister Takeuchi now gets a great mandate from the people. But as you may know, Prime Minister Abe is a very visionary prime minister who started like idea of free and open Indo-Pacific. And Takeuchi is a pupil of former Prime Minister Abe. So Takeuchi publicly said that she is following Abe's vision, Abe's doctrine, in a sense. But compared with Abe era and now, the geopolitical situation is more complicated, much harder, tough. Therefore, she needs a big mandate from the people, and her vision is to make Japan a very strong country in terms of the defense, and also a rich country in terms of the economics. That's what she wants to do. Then when it comes to the defense, and actually even before Takeuchi, former Prime Minister Kishida laid the way to reach to 2% of GDP, which is a NATO standard. It started 2022. And that is the huge departure from the post-World War, the Japanese public psyche. Because at that time, GDP 1% was like a ceiling of defense spending. But even Kishida-san, he was considered as a dove, but he decided to go for further. Why? Because of the deterioration of stability of the world and global situation. So the Japanese people, peace-loving people, understand we need to expand our defense spending so that we can properly defend our country. So Takeuchi-san is based upon that. But now it's very tough times. So some countries are attempting to change status quo by using force or intimidation unilaterally. Therefore, the Takeuchi-san is determined to do that. And in her scope, I think they're not just Indo-Pacific, but also she has a global view, including the Arctic area. Because Arctic area is going to be very, very serious area in terms of the security, but at the same time, like climate change you just described, Arctic will be the future. But Takeuchi-san is working hard for that.
Let me just thank you, Ambassador. Let me build on that a little bit because we had Minister Anand yesterday talk about the Arctic Sentry program. And what was exciting about it, the IP4, Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, are part of the Arctic Sentry program. So your country's already looking to partner and to have collaboration in the Arctic. Do you see that being the first of many shared exercises and shared commitments to the Arctic?
It's starting. Actually, if Japanese interest in Arctic area used to be very much scientific and gradually economic. But now, the global thinker realize Arctic area is a very, very important area in terms of security affairs. Therefore, the Japanese participation of the NATO cooperation is one of those lines, and Arctic is naturally one of those areas. Eventually, will work. And actually, it's even now, the self-defense forces would participate as an observer for the Operation Nanook in Arctic area. And also just 10 days ago, or just last week, the US forces and the Japanese defense forces, self-defense forces, and the Canadian Army did a joint exercise in the very snowy area called North Wind. Okay. That is the first ever Canada joined this US-Japan joint exercise in a very cold area, sort of assuming like Arctic areas. Yeah. So we've been sort of taking off for that path.
That's exciting. High Commissioner, Japan, Canada, we're trying to get to 2% of defense spending. India has already passed that, a massive defense budget, very large professional military, and the shipbuilding is unbelievable, building a new ship on average every 40 days and pivoting to do more in the Arctic. Talk about Prime Minister Modi's strategy there. Obviously, Japan has the newest leader in the G20. Prime Minister Modi is one of the most senior leaders in the G20. Where do you see Indian defense going and this polar expertise in partnership with Russia, but building a capacity? Do you see that continuing?
We live in a very difficult neighborhood, and we're the only country probably which got our independence through non-violent means. But the moment we got independence, within about 10 years, we had to fight a war. And so we're not ready for it, but we had to, because our region we stayed in was a difficult region. And so there's a lot of stress on building up the military to protect ourselves. We're a large country, huge borders. We have 7,500 kilometers of sea coast. Just maintaining the sea coast is itself huge for a developing country. And so 2% is something we passed long back. But if we had a way, we would not like to spend on defense. But the world, the way it is, we have to spend on defense. We have cooperation across the world today. Shipbuilding, we've come late to the table, but we have picked up pace a lot. We still don't have polar icebreakers. That's the only thing we lease it out from friends, or we work with other countries to do research on polar icebreakers. But we are in the process of building one. We'll build one very soon, and hopefully that will help us do more research on the Arctic. But if you look at defense per se, and if you look at Arctic, what we have for the Arctic is to replicate what we have in the Antarctic, where everybody really works together. There are no sovereignty issues. There are no sovereignty claims. Everybody has stations. They do scientific research. They look at climate change issues. They look at how can we build up the Antarctic into an area which benefits us all. And the Arctic would love it to be something like that. Mm-hmm. But if it is not, and even if there are conflicting claims, I mean, you have Article 234 of the UNCLOS, which some countries use to control navigation through the Arctic, which allows you environmental protection. So they allow it to tell you that we need to escort icebreakers. We need to make sure that people go on the right way. So there is a large issues that are going to come up in the Arctic. These large issues can only be solved if all countries get together to ensure that there is a fair and equitable way of making sure that the Arctic remains a zone of peace. Up till now, it has not been, but we are hopeful that will happen.
If I may, I just want 2 points about the 2% thing. And now the NATO has a 5% target by 2035. It's divided like a 3% to 3.5% of the defense equipment, and 1.5 like a more technology and related things. And that tells technology is so important. The high tech can shape the future. So in order to address many issues, when we have AI, quantum, and computer chips on those, high technology matters. So when it comes to this defense things, including architect, the technology, as Dinesh, you said, it's so important. But at the same time, technology, high technology is directly affect national security. Then the question is, how much trust do you have when you work together? So for example, that 2 weeks ago, I signed the agreement between Japan and Canada on transfer of defense equipment and technology. That this agreement only make possible for the countries to exchange the equipment and technologies. And trust is very important in this sense. So some technology is actually related to the national security directly. That is one thing I would like to add. And second thing is the talking about this RC breakers and others. And I'm proudly said that the Japanese government start to inaugurate the high-tech ship, including the icebreaker function, in what we call the Mirai 2, that is the 2 of the future. This is the first best scientific research vessel which can be operated in Arctic area. So this is a great sort of a venue for expand international cooperation among the scientists to look into the actual mechanism of the global warming and its effects.
And that's a great segue, Ambassador, back to you, High Commissioner, because I know you talked about ice-class vessels. The Modi government recently earmarked $3 billion to build new ships that have an ice classification. Of course, we're opening up ports. Churchill, Premier Canoe talks about Churchill, I think, 5 times a day. I think Canadians now know where Churchill is. And with this Russian collaboration, you're actually having your sailors trained on polar routes, mainly the northern route. Are you going to accelerate that? And can you see some of this trade coming to Canada? Obviously, Minister Hodgson just had a great visit to India. I know the Prime Minister may be going as well. Do you see that playing into trade on resources, on energy, and a range of things with those polar class ships?
It is inevitable. I mean, it will happen. It's only a matter of time. It's not if, but when. It is going to happen, and we have to be prepared for it. As a large country with interests all over the world, it's not easy for us not to be prepared. We have to be prepared, and one of them, I mean, Japan's Mirai is now on the rating. It's the rating 1 on the icebreakers. We are doing ships with rating 7, 6, 5. We still have a long way to catch up, but we will. We've been working with Japan. We've been working with Sweden, with Norway, with Russia, with others, looking to see how we can use their icebreakers for our research work. But on trade, it is going to open up. It's already opened up. In fact, people are questioning Article 234 because earlier it was all covered by ice. Today, when there is sea lanes opening up, does really Article 234 apply? So there's a lot of questioning happening globally. Our point is, when this questioning happens, we need to be part of the global governance, where we need to contribute to seeing that the global governance has an equitable way of doing things. And that's very important. And for that, if we have to invest in technology, invest in shipbuilding, invest in manpower resources, you will need not just sailors, you will need scientists, technicians, people who know the polar region. And we have today one of the largest cohorts of scientific personnel who are experts in glaciology, in permafrost, in Arctic conditions, in Antarctic, and everything else. So for us is to be able to supply highly talented researchers, highly talented sailors, capable enough to handle the Arctic. It will happen. I mean, it's inevitable.
It's inevitable. It's not if, it's when.
It's when.
On that, Ambassador, and please bring your point up, but I'd like to hear a little bit on critical minerals because, of course, a lot of Japanese, Sumitomo, a whole range of companies have long-standing relationships with some of the Canadian mining companies. obviously we have some of our leaders in precious metals and innovators in critical minerals here. Do both of your countries, starting with Japan, see Canada as key to that critical mineral rare earth supply and wrestling that control back from China?
Yeah, you're right. So I've been hearing a lot of opinions from the Japanese companies which have already invested in this country. In their views, that this country is very rich in those natural resources, including critical minerals. And this global warming, decarbonization is inevitable. And every country is committed for carbon neutral by 2050. And in that context, critical mineral is indispensable. Then the critical mineral is also so important for national security. Therefore, now countries are thinking, from which country we get this critical mineral? This is so critical. So Canada is a rich country in resources, and Canada is a country which can be trusted. So they pay a lot of attention to critical minerals and other natural resources of this country. But at the same time, to be very, very honest with you, and this potential is one thing.
Yes.
But actually, the business is very serious matters. So there are 4 major challenges, in a sense, in the eyes of the not only Japanese companies, but other companies, including Canadian companies, with lack of infrastructure. Because all those mines, especially in the Arctic areas, it's so remote places. Therefore, infrastructure is necessary, but to be very honest with you, not enough infrastructure yet. The second, Canada is basically a very progressive country, and environmental consideration is so highly regarded. That means enormous, say, procedures and regulations and, so to speak, red tapes, and time is money. And so for businesses, they can't wait forever. So that's
You sound like me in the House of Commons. If
and and also the third thing is on those remote areas and rich places for natural resources and critical minerals, and the indigenous community have enormous impact and say how to deal with those things, including and based upon traditions and respect to the cultures. So it's never easy for the Western companies to get support and understanding what they are going to do. So this is also a very, very important matter. And the fourth, coordination, not only between federal governments and provincial governments, and sometimes between provincial governments, the coordination is very tough. But I don't think it is impossible to address those challenges. I think now the Canadian government stands tall to accelerate to address those challenges. And so we're really looking forward to the development of that.
Thank you for your frank talk, Ambassador. And High Commissioner, you probably agree. Like, this is kind of the reputation.
Goes,
Canada's safe, reliable, but slow, cumbersome. Like, has the MPO, standing up the Major Projects Office, has the Prime Minister's seeming attention to these details, is that being heard around the world? Do they think we're now a place where investment is more reliable in terms of a return? Is the impression starting to turn? Or do we actually have to deliver a couple of projects before the world sort of says, okay, Canada's changed?
You've got it right. It's been heard all over the world, but it has to be seen.
It has to be seen. Yeah.
I mean, hearing it is very good. It's great projects coming up. But Canada, given its past, really hasn't put much influence on putting up the right infrastructure for a long time. We want to buy everything that you have, whether it's crude, LNG, critical minerals, rare earths, you name it. But today, critical minerals has become a byword. Everybody is focusing on it. There's enough critical minerals in the world if you look at it closely. It's only the processing which is a problem. And China actually holds all the processing capabilities. So what we need to work on it. One is, of course, access to critical minerals, which is we are working on. Washington recently did a meeting of all the non-China countries to see how we can have new supply chains for critical minerals. But there are two things we have to work on. One is to increase our processing capabilities. There are only very few companies. There are one or two Canadian companies which have the capability. There's a French company, a Finnish company, there's some Japanese, 2 to 3 Japanese companies. Of course, American companies had it, they sold it to the Chinese, if you remember, which is why they have all the capabilities today. So one is to bring back capabilities of processing. The other is, 10 years ago, we didn't need these rare earths magnets. It just come in 10 years. When did you hear about it 10 years before?
Yeah.
And similarly, we have to find replacements for this. We cannot live in a world where we have to always search for the high-cost alternative. We have to search for the low-cost alternative. And there is a lot of research going on globally that you can make magnets out of other elements which are not rare earths, where you really don't have to go to the ends of the world to do it, or you have different systems which work. And that's one thing people are not talking about too much. But that's one thing the world needs to focus on. Because 10 years from today, you should have a world where you don't need this costly elements where you dig up the ground to do it. I mean,
but you can't have China controlling all the means of
they
production.
won't. The control will go. Control is temporary right now. Everybody has understood that it's necessary to be strategically autonomous on this. Everybody's understanding they need to bolster their own capabilities. And so they're working together. And it will happen. Global finance is working towards supporting people to bolster up capabilities. It will happen. It's always happened. When oil, 1970s, when oil went through the roof, everybody thought Middle East was the only one. Everybody put their efforts there. Then you had alternatives coming up. Then you have renewable energy. Today, the world is a different place. The same thing will happen on critical minerals. So I don't think so we should panic, but we should put systems in place, have guardrails to make sure that we reach a stage where either we don't need it, and if we need it, we have the processing capability, which is a separate supply chain where it is easy to access them.
So the two things. So actually, we're talking about economic security. So if there's a sort of a trust and shared strategic interest and the commercial interest, we don't have to worry about the supply chain. But actually, we are living in a very, very difficult, complicated times of the geopolitics. So economic cohesion is always the risk. And so that is the things we have to think hard. So for the time being, we need those critical minerals. Then we need to have a secure supply chain to consider, to make sure that economic security be fulfilled. That is one thing. In long run, yes, technological development is very important. But at the same time, technology is also possessed by certain special countries. Then, how to make sure that those technology be shared by the like-minded countries if necessary. That is another sort of economic security. So this is not just the critical minerals or rare earth and other things, but this is a very important concept of the policy formulation of our times.
I'm glad because the last topic, before start thinking of your questions, please. You mentioned technology, you mentioned sovereignty, and I've been talking for many years about sovereign capability. And for Canadians that don't know what that is, remember when we couldn't get masks that were made in Michigan, we couldn't get them across the border. In a time of crisis, you have to rely on yourself. Digital sovereignty and cloud, AI, connectivity. I know Japan is looking at major investments in subsea cables and connectivity, data, not relying too much on the United States for data or for cloud. What are both of your countries doing in terms of prioritizing that digital sovereignty piece? And can a cable through the Northwest Passage for good people, as long as it's built with Canadians, is that something that's on the radar for Japan?
So this is the part of the economic security and also the national security too. So the Dinesh, you're right. No country can survive on its own. We have to work together. But it's especially the intensity and level of the collaboration depends upon how much the two countries are close and share the things. So in that sense, and I would say our relations with the United States is a cornerstone of our foreign policy and security policy. And Canada is also one of those top countries which we trust in many ways. So you just mentioned the digital sovereignty and others. It's all included. And data center is very, very important. But at the same time, Canada, especially in the Arctic area, the best place for data center. Because when you have a data center, you need to have several elements.
Cooling.
One, cold weather,
Yes.
a lot of water, and trust, and land, and electricity. If I have my own company, then I choose Canada because cold weather, trust, land, and electricity would be provided by the micro module reactor.
SMRs.
That is joint working of Hitachi of Japan, GE of US, and Darlington Place of Canada. So
My old riding. You know,
Yes,
I'm a fan.
yes.
And our study on sovereignty in 2018 was the first time the NDP, thanks to Daniel Blakey, who's now Wab Kinu's advisor in Manitoba on Arctic issues, first time the NDP ever signed on to something that had nuclear energy in it was SMRs and their
In
capability. High Commissioner, your thoughts on the digital sovereignty piece, technology, data centers. How does India view Canada as an opportunity?
See, data is the new oil. The world is going to be run by data in the future. And so data sovereignty becomes a very big thing. You have some wonderful companies here which are working on LLM sovereignty, large language models, enterprise models. There's a lot of things happening in the field. But coming back to what Kanji-san said, countries have to work together. No country is an island. There are some countries which are islands, but no country is an island. But we really need to work together because connectivity, AI, quantum, the whole cyberspace is something where the next wars will be fought, the next conflicts will happen, the next technology breaks will happen. And for that, it is important that we work together. Now, imagining in the Arctic a nuclear substation powering a data center is amazing if it happens, SMR in the Arctic. But that's not how we need to move forward. We need to move forward by making sure that we provide, see, the digital divide is today very big. These things are only discussed by people who have the capability to set it up. There's a large part of the world which does not have the capability to do the things we are discussing here. Mm-hmm. We are discussing large data centers. We are discussing huge technological collaborations. Large parts of Africa, Latin America, even Asia do not even have access to normal data. And so for us, we have to look at the globe as a whole and see what we can do. And in that, Canada had a big role to play. You know, some of the big international reforms or international initiatives were taken by Canada in the past. Mm-hmm. Whether you look at peacekeeping, whether you look at small arms, you look at global environmental regulations, you took a lot of initiative in the beginning multilaterally.
Yeah.
You became complacent in the last many years.
We became complacent. Nuclear energy and India can do. Yeah, was an early trailblazer.
So you need to get out of your complacency and start doing things. You are the second largest country in the world, a G7 country with capabilities of huge capabilities. And it's important that you be there in the forefront, playing a role to bring the best to the world.
Shake off our complacency. I'll do a round of applause for them. So I'm going to go to questions for the last 2 minutes, but Ambassador and I share a love of military history and a particularly special connection that Canada and Japan has. For our last Victoria Cross winner was a Canadian lost in the battle in the Pacific, Robert Hampton Gray. The ambassador wrote a magnificent piece in the Globe and Mail. I know a couple of Globe and Mail, Steve and others are here. Talk about Robert Hampton Gray and how he is an example of, now not just the Arctic, but our past and our strong history. I'm squeezing this in before questions. Robert Hampton Gray.
Thank you very much for the where I start. And if you remember, 9th of August of 1945, it's the date of the second atomic bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. And my hometown is Nagasaki Prefecture too. But at the same day, in the northern side of Japan, they're called Onagawa Bay, was an air attack by the Royal British forces. And Robert Hampton Gray was a captain of the squadron of that year's strike force. But he was the only victim in that air ride. But more than 200 Japanese people were killed in that time. So the name of Hampton Gray in this country was a hero, the Victoria Cross. But in those local community, his name, he was a kind of enemy who killed my families and things. Then time passed by. So by 1985, so 40 years after the end of the World War II, the Canada-Japan relations in general, very good. So therefore, the Canadian embassy in Tokyo asked Onagawa people, can we build their memorial for Robert Hampton Gray? The huge disagreement with the local community because of the reason I just described. But there's one person who is the young soldier at that time. He survived. And he was very successful business person in Onagawa area. And he said my friends, I know your pains, but the war ended 40 years ago. Why don't we start based upon that and respect and honor to the victims? So let Canadian people to build the memorial for their heroes. It took 4 years, but actually at the end of the day, Onagawa people accepted his Robert Hampton Gray's memorial. Then that was the beginning of the friendship between the families of Robert Hampton Gray and Japanese person whose name is Kanda-san, Kanda. And it's a kind of a very nice, beautiful story of the personal friendship, which represent the trust between two countries. And if you remember, 2011, the big earthquake took place in the northern side of Japan. So huge tsunami. And Onagawa was also victimized by a big tsunami. So that memorial of Robert Hampton Gray was lost because of the tsunami. There was local people, we rebuilt that one together with the Canadian embassies. And that was a symbol of the friendship between our two countries. So yesterday's enemy become today's friend. That is a beautiful side. And last year, 9th of August, that is the 80th anniversary of the Nagasaki bomb and death of Robert Hampton Gray. Then I was asked to come to Halifax for their ceremony. Because Canadian Navy's new vessel, patrolling in Arctic Sea, is named as Robert Hampton Gray. But at the same day, that was in Halifax. And in Ottawa, there's a ceremony for the honor of the Nagasaki bomb victims. My hometown is Nagasaki, and I'm a Japanese ambassador. So I wish I had two bodies. But so going to Ottawa's Nagasaki ceremony or going to Halifax. But I decided to go to Halifax. Then I met Robert Hampton Gray's families, and I had a chance to talk with Defense Minister McGuinty and others. Then this Robert Hampton Gray is a new vessel for the patrolling in Arctic Sea. It's a great, what can I say, symbol of our two nations' like-mindedness, and we share strategic interest there. So I would say, name of Robert Hampton Gray is means yesterday's enemy became today's friend, and comrade for the future to make peace.
Wonderful, wonderful. All right, we have time for a couple of questions. Maybe please identify who you are, who you're with, and which ambassador you'd like to speak to. But we needed to sneak that. More people needed to know the story of Robert Hampton Gray.
Hi there. My name is Olivia Lasseline. I'm working for Global Affairs Canada on Canada-China relations. First, I'd like to thank you for your commentary. It's been very interesting and very colorful. So throughout the last 2 days, we've heard a lot about China's ambitions in the Arctic and whether they're purely economic security focused, if they have different interests and so forth. And as their closer neighbors, I was just wondering if you could provide your own commentary or thoughts on China's ambitions in the Arctic and what you might have seen being closer to them than Canada.
Good question. Do either of your countries consider themselves near Arctic states or?
No. Well, it depends on
Dinesh,
how you
why don't you
define
start?
near.
Yeah.
Depends on how you define near. We're just about 7,000 kilometers away from the Arctic. So if that's near in some parlance, but no, it doesn't matter whether you're near Arctic or Arctic. Right now, the Arctic is supposedly controlled by the Arctic 8 or Arctic 7 plus Russia, depends on how you look at it. You cannot have a zone of global commons being actually determined by only a few countries. If it's a global commons, everybody has a stake in it, everybody has a say in it, those who get influenced by it, those who have interest in that place, everybody has to have a say in it. It's being led by the Arctic 8, but at the same time, we all as observer members, also as members of the United Nations, members of UNCLOS, need to have a say in what happens. China has its own way of handling things. We've seen it in the past. In fact, there's a Chinese saying which goes from what Kanji-san said, which says that anything which has changed in the past will change in the future. Which basically means the sun rises in the east. If it hasn't changed in your lifetime, it will not change later on. But anything which has changed in the past will change in the future. Enemies will become friends, friends will become enemies. We need to deal with everybody at all times, looking at your own interest and the global interest, rather than just as enemies and friends.
So based upon the Canadian Indo-Pacific strategy issued about 4 years ago, 3 years ago.
By her department? Yeah.
China was described as increasingly disrupting global power. And the definition, the way the Canadian government sees China is like that. And I think that recognition will be shared by many countries. And also, but that is a general remark on China in many ways. But when we focus on the Arctic area, then I just described 5 very important elements: geopolitics and security, business, and environment, and the international cooperation with science and indigenous. And then when we see the security side, then in Global Mail reported very detailed sort of action by China, and China, Russia doing together exercises and flying or the navigating, and the unknown sort of activities over there, and intimidating the sovereignty of this country. That's the very, very serious matters. And when it comes to the environmental issues, and we know how they process those stones, critical minerals, a lot of carbon footprint. That's why they can produce things in cheap prices. So we have to be very, very careful of that. And sometimes, we can work together for their scientific research. But as I just mentioned, technology, high technology, can be a very, very, very sensitive area in terms of the national security. In that sense, we are very, very careful about what they are doing and pay a lot of attention.
I think we have time for one more question. Is there anyone other than the Global Mail? Steve Chase in the back.
Well, that's also...
I'm teasing.
Steve Chase, Global Mail. I just want to say, first of all, I was surprised that Canada and other countries didn't speak up for Japan when it was under attack from China, as it's been under attack from China for the past few months in terms of the pushback against your leader's statements on Taiwan. But my question actually is about the Northwest Passage. And this is for both envoys. Does India recognize the Northwest Passage as an internal waterway of Canada's? And for the Japanese ambassador, does Japan recognize the Northwest Passage as an internal waterway of Canada's as opposed to an international crossing?
Good question. Who wants to take that one first?
Go ahead.
I don't think...
The global commons you were talking about.
Yes. No, for us, we understand UNCLOS laws. Now, UNCLOS does not really give sovereignty over international navigation waters. It gives only up to certain nautical miles from land. So if you look at the UNCLOS, there is a global commons and there is also sovereignty over a certain part of the land. To claim sovereignty over a passage opens up a can of worms where we are fighting in the South China Sea, we're fighting in Indian Ocean, we're fighting all over the place. And I think it's a thing which all of us have to discuss together to see whether it should be part of the global commons or it should be part of a country's territorial sovereignty.
So that's a very sensitive question about sovereignty. And
Steve Chase is known for sensitive questions.
we know there's a dispute between two countries going on. We carefully watch that. And in terms of the Northwest Passages, to say down the road, all the ice would be melted during the summertime. Then the ADIT of the Northwest Passage comes up. Then the situation will be very new, different. Then I really hope that the dispute will be solved between Canada and the United States first.
You can see why they're some of their country's best diplomats. Those are very diplomatic answers. And conversations matter. So I hope you can ask both of your leaders, the recently elected and the long-serving Prime Minister Modi, to let Canada into the Quint. You know, it's the Quad now. We've got 2 members of the Quad. Maybe Canada needs to be in the Quint. Our Prime Minister gives good speeches, so we should be in. But ladies and gentlemen, this has been so interesting to hear a perspective from our friends in the Indo-Pacific. Please show them your thanks and recognition.
ありがとうございました。
Thank you.